for the harsh simplicity of survival. His hands, scarred and weathered from years of trapping and skinning game, gripped the reins with practiced ease. The leather saddlebags behind him bulged with beaver pelts and wolf hides, a month's worth of trapping that would fetch enough salt, ammunition, and flour to see him through the worst of winter. If he could make it to Pine Ridge before the storm hit full force, he might just stay alive. The town appeared through the snow like a mirage. A cluster of rough-hewn buildings huddled against the mountainside, smoke rising from chimneys only to be torn away by the wind. Samuel hadn't planned to stop there. Pine Ridge wasn't his usual trading post. That was Clear Creek, another day's ride north. But Buck was favoring his left front leg, and the storm was closing in fast. He guided his horse down the main street, past the general store with its frost-etched windows, past the saloon where yellow lamplight spilled onto the wooden sidewalk. The town seemed unusually quiet for late afternoon. Then he heard it, the faint, distant sound of fiddle music carried on the wind. The small church at the end of the street blazed with light. Horses and wagons crowded around it, their owners apparently unconcerned about the storm. Samuel frowned. A wedding, from the look of it. In weather like this, folks must be either very much in love or very much in a hurry. He dismounted outside the livery stable, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. A freckled stable boy, no more than 14, came running out rubbing his hands together. "Afternoon, mister. That's quite a storm brewing." "That it is," Samuel replied, his voice rough from disuse. Days could pass in the mountains without him speaking to anyone but Buck. "My horse needs tending. Left front hoof might have a stone." The boy nodded, eyes wide, as he took in Samuel's wild appearance, the tangled beard, the wolfskin cap, the rifle slung across his back. Mountain men were a rare sight these days, even in Pine Ridge. "Wedding at the church," the boy offered as he took Buck's reins. "Mr. Morrison's marrying that woman from back east. Pretty as a picture, they say." Samuel grunted. He had no interest in gossip or society weddings. His concern was the storm and finding shelter for the night. Across the street stood the Frontier Inn, a squat building with frost thick on its windows. He stepped inside, the warmth hitting him like a physical force. The common room was nearly empty. Most of the town was clearly at the wedding. Samuel approached the front desk where a thin man with spectacles sat reading a newspaper. "Need a room for the night," Samuel said, setting a silver dollar on the counter. The clerk looked up, adjusting his spectacles. "Certainly, sir, though you might have trouble sleeping with all the celebration. The whole town's at the church. Mr. Morrison's quite the prominent citizen." Samuel took the offered key without comment. He had no intention of joining any celebration. A hot meal, a warm bed, and he'd be gone at first light, storm or no storm. But as he turned to head upstairs, the church doors across the street burst open. Music and laughter spilled out into the snowy evening as the wedding party began to emerge. Samuel paused, despite himself, watching through the inn window. The groom came first. A heavy-set man in his 40s wearing a black suit that strained across his shoulders. His face was flushed, whether from cold or drink Samuel couldn't tell. He had the look of a man used to getting his way, small calculating eyes and thick hands that gripped his new bride's arm possessively. Then Samuel saw her. She stepped out of the church like a vision in white. Her simple cotton gown stood out against the bleak frontier, modest but graceful, far from the grand gowns of city brides. Her dark hair was pinned neatly beneath a light veil, and when she lifted her face to the snow, Samuel's heart stopped. Even through the dusk, even across the street, he could see her clearly. The delicate curve of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders, the slight tilt of her head, all painfully familiar. She turned then, as if sensing his gaze, and looked straight toward the inn window. Her eyes widened, her lips parted in surprise. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze, the crowd and music fading away until only the two of them existed in that snow-lit street. Then, without a word, she pulled free of her husband's grip and began walking toward the inn. The white hem of her dress dragged through the snow, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes never left Samuel's face. He found himself moving too, drawn by something stronger than reason. He pushed open the inn door just as she reached it. Up close, he saw how beautiful she had become. Not the pretty child he remembered, but a woman with quiet grace and the kind of sadness that came from living too much too soon. She stopped before him, her breath misting in the cold air. Her eyes, green, flecked with gold, met his. "Do you recognize me, mountain man?" she asked softly. "I was your childhood neighbor." The word struck him like a hammer. "Elizabeth," he whispered. "Libby Turner." She smiled faintly, a sad, sweet smile. "No one's called me that in years. It's Elizabeth now, Elizabeth Morrison, as of about 10 minutes ago." Behind her, the groom's angry voice cut through the wind. "Elizabeth, what in blazes are you doing?" She flinched but didn't turn. Instead, she reached out and briefly touched Samuel's hand, her fingers ice cold. "I'm glad I got to see you again," she whispered. "Glad to know you're alive." Quote, Then her husband was there, grabbing her arm roughly. "You'll excuse my wife," he said in a tone that carried no apology. "She's overtired from the celebrations." Samuel said nothing. He wanted to pull her away from the man, but he knew the rules of the world they lived in. She was married now. She belonged to another. Her eyes lingered on him for one last moment, filled with something he couldn't name. A plea, a warning, or a farewell. Then she was gone, swallowed by the swirling snow. Samuel stood there in the doorway long after the church lights dimmed, staring into the storm, his mind spinning with the impossible truth. Libby Turner was here, his Libby, and she was married to a man whose touch had left bruises before the wedding night was even over. Samuel didn't sleep that night. The storm beat against the walls of the inn, rattling the shutters and howling down the chimney, but the sound that kept him awake was not the wind. It was the memory of her voice. Elizabeth Turner, the girl who had once promised to marry someone brave, the girl who had vanished without a goodbye. And now she was here, trapped in a marriage that already looked like a prison. He sat by the small lamp, staring at the flickering flame until dawn bled pale light across the mountains. When he finally rose, the storm had passed, leaving the world buried under 2 feet of snow. The sky was clear and painfully bright, and the air carried that sharp stillness that comes only after a blizzard. He went downstairs and found the innkeeper, Josiah Pritchard, pouring coffee for a few early risers. "Morning, Mr. Hawkins," the man said. "Quite a blow last night." Samuel nodded. "Any word from the Morrison place?" Pritchard raised a brow. "You know them?" Quote, "Old acquaintance of Mrs. Morrison," Samuel said carefully. Pritchard's face shifted to something between pity and concern. "Then you'll be interested to hear the talk. Mrs. Dobbs, who does the cleaning up there, came in early for supplies. Said there was trouble in the Morrison house. Shouting, things breaking, the new miss locked herself in her room. Not much of a honeymoon, if you ask me." Quote, Samuel's jaw tightened. "Is she all right?" "As far as anyone knows. The doctor wasn't called. Morrison don't like folks meddling in his affairs." Samuel drained his coffee and left without another word. He needed to think, to move. The walls of the inn felt like they were closing in around him. Outside, Pine Ridge was waking up under the new snow. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the sound of hammers echoed from the blacksmith's shop. But beneath the normal rhythm of the town, Samuel sensed something tense and unspoken, like a wound covered, but not healed. He stopped at the stable to check on Buck. The horse was doing better, the stone removed from his hoof, but the stable boy had news too. "Mr. Morrison's shipment went out this morning," the boy said. "Freight wagons heading south toward the mining camps. Big money in that cargo, they say." Samuel grunted. "And Mrs. Morrison?" The boy hesitated. "Saw her at the window when I went by the house. She looked sad, I guess." Quote, Samuel saddled Buck and rode out toward the edge of town, where Morrison's grand 2-story house stood apart from the others. It was built more like a fortress than a home. Solid timber walls, iron gates, and windows that looked more suited for watching enemies than letting in sunlight. He didn't go closer. A man like Morrison would have guards or loyal men nearby. He turned back toward town, wrestling with his thoughts. He'd spent half his life avoiding other people's problems, believing the wilderness was the only place a man could live free and honest. But now, with Elizabeth back in his life, that old belief felt hollow. Freedom meant nothing if he stood by while someone good and kind suffered within reach. By late afternoon, he found himself in the saloon, nursing a whiskey and listening. Morrison was there, surrounded by his men, holding court like a king among rough subjects. His loud laughter carried across the room. To Morrison, one man toasted, "May his new wife give him strong sons. And may she survive the process." Another joked, earning crude laughter. Samuel's grip on his glass tightened until the rim cracked. He forced himself to stay still, to watch, to wait. Morrison leaned back in his chair, puffing on a cigar, his face red and smug. "She'll learn her place soon enough," he said. "Eastern women are delicate, but I'll make her a proper frontier wife." Samuel couldn't listen anymore. He rose quietly, dropped a coin on the counter, and walked into the cold night. The anger inside him burned hotter than the whiskey. As he passed the church, he noticed a faint light flickering inside. Curious, he pushed open the side door. The warmth of candlelight spilled over the empty pews. And there she was, kneeling near the altar, her shoulders shaking. "Elizabeth," he said softly. She turned, startled, but then relaxed when she saw him. Her eyes were red, her cheeks pale. "Samuel, I didn't mean for you to see me like this." He stepped closer. "Are you hurt?" She gave a small, bitter laugh. "Not yet. He's drinking with his business associates. I said I needed a moment of air. I came here." Quote. He sat beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Why did you marry him?" She looked down at her hands. "After Mother died, I had nothing. No money. No home. Mr. Morrison offered security. He said he'd take care of me. And now? Now I realize what I traded away for safety." She wiped at her eyes, then met his gaze. "Do you ever think about that last summer before the fire?" "Every day," he said quietly. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered. "When we left Missouri, Mother was half mad with grief. Uncle Theodore met us in Independence and took us east. She made us change our name. Said it was the only way to escape Father's debts. I looked for you," Samuel said, "rode all the way to Independence that winter asking anyone who'd listen. No one knew where you'd gone." For a long time they sat in silence, the only sound the wind pressing against the church walls. Finally Elizabeth rose. "I should go back before he sends someone for me." He stood too, catching her hand gently. "If you need help, anything at all, I'll be at the inn." Quote. She squeezed his fingers. "You always were trying to rescue things, Samuel Hawkins. But this isn't a baby bird with a broken wing. This is my life now." "Did you choose it?" he asked quietly. "Or did circumstances choose for you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked toward the door, pausing only once to glance back. "How long will you stay in town?" "As long as necessary." She nodded, then disappeared into the snow. Samuel stood there for a long time, staring at the flickering candles. He wasn't sure if what he felt was hope or despair. But one thing was clear. He couldn't just ride away. The next morning, the town buzzed with new gossip. Morrison's freight wagon had been attacked in Devil's Canyon. The driver was dead, the goods stolen. Some blamed Apache raiders, others bandits. Morrison stormed through town, furious, shouting that someone would pay. Samuel listened from a distance, suspicion forming in his mind. The attack seemed too precise, too well-timed. He'd been a scout long enough to recognize the signs of an inside job. And if Morrison's business was failing, a stolen shipment might just be a convenient way to collect insurance. By nightfall, Samuel had made up his mind. If Morrison truly was involved in something crooked, or worse, if he was capable of hurting Elizabeth, Samuel would find proof. He had survived alone in the wilderness for 12 years. Now he would use those same skills: patience, observation, and quiet resolve, for something far greater than his own survival. Outside, the snow began falling again, soft and silent over Pine Ridge. And in that quiet town at the edge of the mountains, the storm that mattered most was no longer the one in the sky, but the one about to break between two men, one born of greed, the other of love. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? The next evening brought chaos to Pine Ridge. Word spread like wildfire that Morrison's freight robbery wasn't what it seemed. Two of his own men had been overheard in the saloon, arguing about insurance money and getting their share. The sheriff locked them in the jail before nightfall, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time before Morrison tried to silence them. Samuel had spent the afternoon with Clarence Headley, Morrison's nervous bookkeeper, confirming what he already suspected. The ledgers Headley kept showed two sets of accounts, one real, one fake, and both pointed to Morrison staging his own robbery for insurance. If the truth came out, Morrison's empire would collapse. But Samuel wasn't thinking about Morrison's fortune. He was thinking about Elizabeth. That night, smoke rose from the Morrison estate. Samuel reached the house in minutes, finding the carriage barn ablaze and townsfolk rushing with buckets. Through the smoke and shouting, he heard a woman scream from an upstairs window, "Elizabeth!" He charged inside before anyone could stop him. The stairs were thick with smoke. He coughed, eyes burning, and found her door locked from the outside. Two heavy swings of his axe shattered the latch. She stumbled into his arms, coughing, her nightdress singed by embers. "He locked me in," she gasped. "Samuel, he locked me in." "I know, you're safe now." He carried her out into the cold night. Women covered her with blankets, while Morrison stormed out of the house, shouting orders. His face changed when he saw Samuel holding her. "Thank God you were there," Morrison said too loudly, his tone false. "The lock must have jammed." "It was locked from the outside," Samuel said firmly, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I saw it myself." The murmurs started immediately, whispers spreading like ripples in a pond. Morrison's face darkened. But before he could speak, Dr. Whitman pushed through the crowd. He examined Elizabeth's arms and face, his expression turning grim. "These bruises aren't from any fire," he said aloud. "These are weeks old, some fresh. This woman's been beaten." The crowd fell silent. Morrison tried to protest, but the damage was done. Samuel's evidence, the ledgers, and now the doctor's testimony. The web was tightening. Judge Carlton issued arrest warrants the next morning. Morrison was furious but powerless as the sheriff hauled him in. For the first time in years, Elizabeth breathed freely. She stayed with Dr. and Mrs. Whitman, recovering under their care. Samuel visited often, and each time she looked stronger, her color returning, her laughter flickering back like a fragile flame. But Morrison wasn't finished. Within a week, he posted bail. He came out of jail angrier than ever, accusing Samuel of theft, slander, and adultery. "You turned my wife against me," he shouted from his horse as he rode through town. "You'll pay for this, mountain man." That night, the sheriff warned Samuel to be careful. "He's dangerous and desperate. A man like that's got nothing left to lose." Samuel nodded. "Let him come." 2 days later, a letter arrived at Dr. Whitman's house. It was from Philadelphia, Elizabeth's mother's cousin, Theodore Ashford. He'd heard of her situation and offered her a home, a position as governess, and passage east. "It's a chance for a new life," Samuel told her softly. "And what about you?" she asked. "I'll manage. I always do." Quote, she touched his hand. "You could come with me." He smiled sadly. "The mountains are my home. I wouldn't fit in your world." "Then I'll stay," she said suddenly. "We'll face him together." "No," Samuel said firmly. "You go. Be safe." She didn't answer, but the tears in her eyes said enough. At dawn, Morrison's vengeance came. A note nailed to the doctor's door read, "Noon. Main Street. Come alone, or she dies anyway. Morrison." The sheriff tried to stop him, but Samuel refused. "This ends today," he said. At noon, Pine Ridge held its breath. The street was empty except for two men, Samuel Hawkins in his worn coat and wide-brimmed hat, and James Morrison dressed in black, eyes burning with hatred. "You ruined me," Morrison spat. "You ruined yourself," Samuel replied. The sheriff called out from the side. "Don't do this, Morrison. Lay down your weapon." "There's no law out here," Morrison snarled. "Only men." A gust of wind stirred the dust between them. Then Morrison's hand twitched toward his gun. Both men drew. The shots rang out, almost as one. Morrison staggered back, clutching his shoulder. Samuel dropped to one knee, blood spreading through his shirt. The sheriff fired once more as Morrison reached for a hidden pistol, ending it for good. The town rushed to Samuel's side. Elizabeth broke through the crowd, kneeling beside him. "You fool," she sobbed. "You said you'd survive anything." He managed a weak smile. "Guess I had to prove it." He drifted in and out of consciousness for hours, feeling her hand in his. When he finally woke, he was in the doctor's house, bandaged but alive. Elizabeth sat beside him, her eyes red from crying. "Morrison?" he asked. "Dead," she said softly. "It's over." He sighed in relief. "You missed your stage." "There'll be another," she said, "but I'm not taking it. I'm staying here with you." He tried to protest, but she silenced him with a kiss. "No more running," she whispered. "No more cages. We build our own life now." Weeks later, when he'd recovered enough to travel, they left Pine Ridge together. The townsfolk gathered to see them off, wishing them well. Elizabeth wore sturdy boots and a wool cloak, her hair loose in the mountain wind. They rode side by side into the wilderness, leaving the town and its memories behind. At his cabin, nestled among the pines, Samuel helped her down from her horse. The mountains stretched before them, endless, wild, and free. "It's not much," he said quietly, "but it's honest." "It's everything," she replied. "It's home." That winter, they married in a small ceremony witnessed only by the snow, the mountains, and their closest friends. Elizabeth traded lace and silk for wool and leather, but her smile was brighter than any jewel. Years later, their children played in the meadow beside the stream. The cabin grew. The walls filled with laughter and warmth. And every now and then, when the sun set behind the peaks and the sky turned gold,